Oh, let me get my timer. Make sure I'm.
Tuesday was next week.
I just saw.
So it's Tuesday and then Thursday. Because everybody's in there.
This is my unpacking because I'm moving, so I had to, I'm like, oh, look at this on the side. Thank you. I would probably switch up the screens, but I'm like, I'm just going to go this way.
Thank you.
No, don't do that. I'll just say the links.
Decide in our meeting. But some of the budgets. Even with the number of people involved, they're asking for a lot of money.
Yeah.
Great, Tuesday.
Perfect. So Tuesday and Thursday.
You inspire these ladies.
Lindsay or Sandy?
This feels familiar. Yeah, only the shoes, just don't family.
Still about law. Or you took your talk. One slow developing for 20 minutes.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
I have to hear about it.
It was nice. We took trains up into the mountains. Mom at 87 doesn't hike, and I never did hike a lot. And so we took trains up into the mountains along rivers and streams. It was really nice.
So are you gonna be doing one of these in your
Yeah.
travels?
One of what?
One of these?
Presentation? No, you didn't fund me.
I was about to say, you're gonna reimburse me, right?
Yeah, didn't give me any money, so why would I do that?
Just so we could all hear. All right, thank you. We will get underway now. And again, this is the IPCCR opportunity for people who got funded last year to tell us all about their fabulous trip and what they did and what they learned. And so, take it away, because I don't think they need to introduce you to anybody.
Okay, great. Yeah, because everyone here, I know everyone.
Exactly.
So the title of my research project was Arts Equity in Finland, Seeding Connections. My inquiry here was how might my work in terms of research in equity in the arts, particularly in dance, what does it look like in a much more homogeneous, smaller gap between wealthy and poor community or country, right? What does that look like, and how are they examining equity and access to arts in such a different kind of society and state structure than ours, right? So that was my question, and the people that I was able to connect with was Raisa Ekoloma. She is the head of theater programming at Mikkeli Community College. And their community college is equivalent to our Parks and Recreation, right? Because their education is funded, there is no community college, right? You just go to college. That's one difference in our structural systems. So it really is much more equivalent to our Parks and Recreation, so it's a little bit of a misnomer in terms of translation there. So she was my actual point of contact. We did work, a Laban training program some years ago. I reached out to her. She put me in contact with some leading arts researchers in the field. And the one that I was able to really get traction on for this work is Eva Antela. She is the program head of the Masters in Dance Pedagogy there. Yes, embodied knowledge. At the Theater Academy of the University of Arts in Helsinki. And for more information on their programming, that's here in this handout here. So my initial findings before I headed out, just looking at the work and what was available, I was able to get my hands on some of Dr. Antela's work. Her book, A Dream Journey to the Unknown, is actually based on her dissertation work. And it really is about the dialogic between student and teacher in the classroom. And I was like, wow, they have the luxury to take the time to go deep in something just in dialogue? What is this? So that was, you know, the idea of having space, breathing room, without so much inequity and other things that happen here that are kind of more urgent and pressing in terms of our politics and how things are managed. There's actually a little bit more breathing room to go deeply in those intimate connections and those embodied connections in the classroom, which was a big kind of discovery, both in the reading but also in my time there. Another interesting work, Her Learning as Practice of Freedom, is an article that I was able to read through, and Mind the Body, Ways of Knowing in Dance and Art. So those were, there's a leaning much more toward practice and toward pedagogy, embodied knowledge, and at the master's level, of course, across the pond. So it was interesting to read her work and get familiar with her ahead of time. The other thing is that I was able to do some preliminary research and, you know, poorly translated Finnish Google searching about the Arts Equal project. And so it's funded by the Finland Arts Commission, right? What would it be equivalent to the Finland Arts Commission? Researching access to the arts and whether and in ways in which access to the arts is equal or unequal in the country. So it's countrywide. It's a number of about 80 researchers that are doing this work in all different fields of art, not just dance. And ironically, it was a little bit of a bait and shift when I actually talked to Raisa about it. It's on the heels of actually closing down many of the arts programs in the universities there. And they kind of essentially redirected funding into how to be more equitable and more accessible in this research funding right on the heels of removing a number of theater programs and arts programming. So now the University of Arts at Helsinki is one of the only ones left in Finland. So that was just the longer arc when I was able to speak to somebody on the ground. And again, as I said, Raisa is a practitioner scholar, so she is boots on the ground teaching in the community colleges there, and is working in integrating Laban into her work, the Laban system into her work in applied theater.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just to follow up about, so was this study a reaction to these programs being shut down, or is it
I'm just laying out what happened before I actually try to dig a bit on Raisa about was one cause and effect of the other.
Yeah.
And she said she couldn't really tell me. Ava said the same, right? That there was no direct connection. All they know is that funding got cut in one place and funding now popped up and in another place. So that was also interesting to me that politically there was no pressing of the button of, are you, right? Like,
Yeah,
is one connected to the other? It wasn't something that I was able, at least in the people that I asked, to establish a cause and effect, which I thought was interesting too. Maybe a cultural, we don't ask those kind of questions. I don't know, right? So the other great timing thing is that I guess I'm standing in front of this, so I'll move out of my own way. Great timing. I was able to go in the fall. They recommended that I come early in the school year, and it actually coincided with a seminar on contemporary art, artistic methods, and future work. So I was able to get a number of scholars that were reporting out about current research in the field there at the University of Arts at Helsinki. And one of the people of note is Nicholas Rao. He was a keynote speaker, and he actually also presented a film on Dancing Seven Cities about community arts programming around the world. The focus of the symposium or the seminar, depending on translation, right? Sometimes it was seminar, sometimes it was symposium. The focus was the lack of academic research on community arts programming. Lack of research around the pedagogy, lack of research around the funding structures, lack of research around ways in which the programs are sustaining themselves financially. So there was a kind of a call to task for the scholars that we're sharing out at the seminar. And the Dancing Seven Cities was a great kind of global pass at what arts programming looks like in a number of places around the world. This is live, and I can share links with you, but the seminar program is still up and live, so you can actually look through to see who all presented, but I just wanted to highlight in the time that I had. So his presentation, not only did he show the film, and we talked about the film, but his presentation, he gave a keynote speech on dance and the politics of exclusion. I was like, oh, I'm so glad I came.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great. So it was a continuation of a dialogue that I was already having here in my own research, but he's having it in places like Palestine and, you know, in different places and locations around the world. Also, that was also interesting being outside of the U.S., who is establishing ourselves as an ally to Israel, to hear the language shift a bit about what's happening in Palestine. That was pretty intriguing to hear. So a lot of connections there. I was able to speak to him to further further a conversation so that we can start to collaborate as researchers in the future, and passing work along from the U.S. here. He is based out of New Zealand, of course, but he was in for this. He is also involved in the Arts Equal research, so he's part of the hired researchers for the Finland study. There was a discussion that was also of note about, he talked about vanity being kind of inherent in art making, and that it takes one who is vain to make art. But as a person who leans toward the studio process, I kind of pushed back on the language and kind of nuanced it a bit. That we may be talking about ego, but not necessarily a visible need to be seen, but maybe a need to be heard in some way, right? Like that there is an urgency of voice of your artwork, but not necessarily about the physicality of that need. Does that make sense? So that was interesting because I pushed back a bit, and then all these wonderful conversations about different people's languages, about how vanity lands in different languages, and we have a word that, you know, that is relevant to this, and it's not quite vanity. It was a really interesting dialogue that happened, that was of interest to me that I may continue a discussion about. He also talked a lot about making things strange, so that people who, what we would say were of a dominant culture, that things are not at all strange and are very common in the day-to-day. Using art as a way to turn things on their head so that they have an experience of the oddity of something culturally happening that doesn't quite make sense. And he talked a bit about that, and that's what he likes to do in his artwork. He is from a ballet background. He used to dance with the ballet, the Finnish ballet. And he began to find that he wanted more connection with people and less about technique and the divide between audience and participant. And that's why he works primarily in this area now. He talked about public pedagogy being, for him, driven by the Marxist reclaiming of the public space, which I thought was a great note of clarity about his intentions, and the investment in community instead of the redistribution of public wealth. That's kind of a nod to the funding structures of how community arts are funded. So that was really intriguing to look at that. And then, of course, the community, he used the term the community arts industrial complex to again talk about those funding sources and the inequity of sources. And if you're not keeping guns off the street with your theater is not worth funding. You know, these kind of notions that they're instrumental to do something other than art, just being for art's sake, right? So that was really great. It was also wonderful references that I was able to expand my field of view in terms of what's going on across the pond. Tasia Cole's White Savior Industrial Complex is how he's tying that work together. So I was able to access, of course, more resources. The more you reach out, the more resources you can gain. I was also able to connect with a Sonia Linforce. Now, her presentation, that was another interesting thing. The symposium was half day in English, half day in Finnish, and then they'd flip, right? So, unfortunately for me, Sonia Linforce was in Finnish, so I actually had to reach out to her afterwards to get a follow-up. So we're in conversation, but I haven't quite gotten what was covered in hers, but it sounds very juicy. And again, this is a live link to her website. She's a performance artist, so she's a working artist. I also, in Helsinki, was able to have discussions with Eva Antala about the Arts Equal project and kind of where they are and what they're finding, some preliminary findings. And that the state of dance education in Finland, particularly for dance and theater, are really kind of on the outs. There is no space for arts and dance in the curriculum, in the core curriculum there. So it functions as if you kind of have a background in dance or you kind of have a background in theater, you teach that somewhere in the school alongside whatever you're actually certified to teach. So, which used to be what it was here by and large, right? So they are still there. There is a severe kind of lack of teacher training. The teacher training kind of starts at the master's pedagogy level. And so they're looking to expand the number of training programs. Also, there is a narrowing of the teaching criteria itself that's happening, that they're tracking. And again, that kind of instrumentalism, right? Like that theater has to do a thing other than be a theater experience in order to be funded or to be valid, right? So it has to increase reading and literacy scores, or it has to, you know, I don't know, I don't know what all the things are. But that they want us to do with this art. I don't know why it can't just be art, but they're making a case that art should be able to be just a lived communal experience in and of itself, that doesn't have to be instrumentalized to serve another funding purpose, right? So that was really a lot of juice in there, a lot of meat in terms of research. I was able to then kind of ethnographically through observation methods and through participant observation, which was a little impromptu. I then traveled up by train, which is about 2 hours away to Mikkeli, to be able to look at what a community college program looks like. I was able to sit in on one of Raisa's middle school aged classes and one of her adult classes, well, part of an adult class, and I'll explain a bit. The middle school age class took place first. A lot of actually theater games that I was familiar with, we did, and I was able to work them out in Finnish, right? That was also, as a movement analyst, it was also really juicy to be able to look at language as the language that I was having to translate ethnographically, right? I had no Finnish in my background, so, right, in my toolkit. So I was able to look, so for me, as an observer, not knowing the language, Raisa's physicality was huge. And I would argue it's larger than mine anyway, just kind of as a teacher. But her ebbs and flows of how she was articulating, she was physically manifesting what she was directing the students to do, right? So now I would like for you to do everything, and then I'd like you to do it really big. So she would have this large ebb and flow in terms of the quality with which she was presenting, that made things, I was able to follow along in a way that if someone was not so demonstrative in terms of, right, like being able to demonstrate and model more clearly, I wouldn't have been able to have it inroads that way. And then, of course, her students asked that I participate. So it went from observer to participant observer in the warm-ups. The students said, can she join us, right? So they were very excited to do the flossing move with with the American. But it was interesting to see the dynamic, right? Like the insecurities, the group cliques, all those things were actually manifesting in the classroom, and Raisa was making choices about how to navigate those in the space, when to ignore them, when to attend to them, and how they were informing the class as a whole. There was also the flexibility of people just floating in, right? People floating in late because, there are no grades. So you get people when you get them, when their parents drop them off, right? And that's when you get them. So there was a lot more flexibility around that that had to be navigated. And then we had a wonderful community Discord experience. Again, I just came at the right time. The situation, oh goodness. In Mikkeli, there is in the community center where the classes are held, there has been a long-standing group of over 100 senior citizens that do ballroom dancing in that space. And they have by and large had that space at their own access, at their own pleasure, whenever they would like it. Because the community college has decided that there needs to be more diversity in programming, they have now had to share space with theater and all these other programs that then take away some of their space. The community college center as an organization has found alternate spaces for them to go to. They haven't completely been kicked out. They still do have access, just not the regular access that they had. And they are furious. So I was lucky enough to come in on the night that they had a town hall. So I got to sit through, not knowing any of the language, all that wonderful body language when people are absolutely furious and outraged, and navigating and watching, and what does the privilege of having a long-standing access look like in the space, as opposed to those who are new to having access to that space, right? And just kind of tracking that in the room, like who has, what's going on. So that was very juicy for the kind of a juicy kind of exercise, technical exercise in managing how to navigate physical manifestation of privilege, like those that were outraged that something was being taken from them. What does that look like physically? And with no finish, that's what I had. That cut down on the adult programming, and that her shift from that kind of negative, stressful space back into a theater space was actually a really wonderful shift, and I can talk more about that at another time because we're running short on time. Personal discoveries for me, kind of future considerations. I'm really looking at community arts programming as part of my research, is that I have a wider diversity of incoming participants whenever you have community arts programming, right? In the ways that we might not in a university setting, right? There's a bar and a standard with which our students come in with a certain mark of work or background. And you, as a teacher, the challenge and the scope of your ability to stretch and mold to what you have has to be, that muscle has to be a lot stronger to do the community programming work. Even the expectations will vary, right? Again, universities by and large have a really large marketing process where you know what you're getting. But in community programming, you're there to serve the community itself. So the navigation and negotiation of shifting from me not being an evaluator to grant you a certificate or a degree, then has to shift to, but this is what the community needs, and listening to all the varying voices. So all of those things were, in short, really interesting sites of potential questions and lines of inquiry in my own research moving forward. And so I hope to continue the work. And these are just photos, because we're down to, we're gone. This is panels. This is the actual beautiful space of the university itself. They have an open courtyard area for more sunlight, I'm sure, right? In that area. And this is the villainized theater space that cuts into all of the dancing, ballroom dancing. And if you can see, they actually bragged about how high-tech and high-end the lighting and the lighting and the setup was, right? So I took pictures of that because apparently that's fascinating and fancy, and I don't know about those things. So, so that's it. I'm at time. But thank you all.
Yes.